episode of Nashir app today with a very special guest, and we will be talking in English, and you can always use the captions to read the Arabic translation. I would love to welcome Dr. Wali Nasser from Hopkins, who gave us the pleasure of meeting him today and giving us some time to talk about his book from 2006, The Revival of Shia, the Shia Revival, the Shia Revival. And we are pleased to have produced the Arabic translation as an audiobook that will be released on our platform. Dr. Nasser, thank you for giving the time today.
Thank you very much. Thanks for inviting me, and thanks for translating and putting this on the audio platform.
You're welcome. So the book now is 18 years old. We have a lot to kind of talk about in the book and also what followed the book. But I wanted to start by asking you, what were your motives to writing that book in 2006?
Well, I had seen sectarianism play a role, maybe under the cover, ever since the Iranian Revolution. I particularly used to work on Pakistan and India and Islamic political movements there. And it was very obvious to me that after the Iranian Revolution, there was a Sunni reaction to the Iranian Revolution, partly because it changed the balance of power within Pakistani society. For instance, the Shia after the Iranian Revolution, with Khomeini in their behind them, they basically resisted paying zakat to a Islamic government in Pakistan on the grounds that it is a Sunni government, and they are not obligated to give their khums and zakat to a Sunni government. The government in Pakistan allowed the Shias to have an exemption, which then created resentment among the Sunnis, who believed that the Shias were making the implementation of Islam in Pakistan under General Zia-ul Haq impossible. And then this gradually metamorphosed in the sense that first Saddam Hussein and then the Saudi monarchy found out that they could not confront Khomeini ideologically. He was too powerful. His anti-Americanism, his call for Islam was too powerful. The easiest way of confronting him was to underscore the fact that he was a Shia. Almost like, look at him, look at his garb, look at his face. This is unfamiliar to us. This is not the right Islam. I saw so much in Pakistan, fatwas that came from the Gulf, fatwas that came from Sunni seminaries about that the Shias are Rafidis. In other words, they are heathen. This was not purely theological, it was political, because the Iranian Revolution changed the balance of power between Shias and Sunnis in the regions. Yes, Islam became very, very important, but it was not a Sunni leader. It was not the Muslim Brotherhood. It was not the Jamaat Islami of Pakistan that had won this, but it was Khomeini and Shiism that had done that. And Khomeini saw himself as the leader of the Islamic world, and many Sunni Islamists, Sunnis who were also politically engaged, tried to reject this. They liked Khomeini's model, but they didn't like the Shias be leading it. I watched in Pakistan over 2 decades an ongoing sectarian fighting, assassinations, bombings, killings. Then it spread to Afghanistan with the Taliban when in the 1990s they executed Iranian journalists and diplomats. The reason that Iran supported the Northern Alliance in Afghanistan partly was sectarian because of the attitude of the Taliban. And then so when the Iraq war happened, while Americans were talking about how they're going to bring democracy to Iraq, how all Iraqis are going to be grateful to the United States, I immediately saw that an event like that, just like the Iranian Revolution, is going to change the balance of power between Shias and Sunnis. And I had seen in Pakistan and in India that the Sunnis would be uncomfortable with enfranchisement and empowerment of the Shias, and they're going to resist it. So the most immediate reaction, I thought, to transferring power from a Sunni-dominated state to a Shia-dominated state would be resistance. That much as in Pakistan, you're not going to have Shias and Sunnis get together under the banner of particularly a Shia government, a Shia order, and they were resisting it. So I saw that sectarianism was coming. I saw that once it came with the explosion of the Al-Askariya Mosque in Samarra in 2006, that Iraq was going to enter into a sectarian period. And so I decided that it's time to actually write something where a broader cross-section of Americans or educated public than just professors at universities would read. So I wrote this book explaining, first of all, who are the Shia, what is their game plan in terms of power, and also bring certain facts to the fore. Like we used to look at the Middle East, we saw Iran as Shia. We didn't see Shias anywhere else. The whole perception of the region was that it's Sunni, either it's majority Sunni or where they're minority, the government is still Sunni. And the Americans had no appreciation for the sectarian dimension. Even though America itself is a divided society, we have African Americans, we have Latinos, we have Jews, we have Muslims, we have different denominations of Christianity who may see political issues differently, may read history differently, may react to one group becoming more powerful than another, but they had no appreciation of this in the Middle East. So it's a book that I wrote about, why this Iraq going from being a Sunni-dominated state under the Baathists to becoming now a Shia-dominated state after what the government that the United States brought to Iraq, why this would be destabilizing in ways that the West didn't understand.
Nice. So in your book, you spoke about how in Islam, you think the Sunnis are more of a Protestant approach if you compare to Christianity, whether the Shiites are more Catholic in their inclinations. And reviewing the history, we seldom saw any Twelver Shiism or like Jafari Shiite really be a movement towards like political gains and political ruling. I mean, there were the Fatimites in Egypt, there were other smaller kind of city-states that had Shiite either like judges or rulers, but never have we seen a politically motivated, but like religiously motivated as a Shia movement to lead politically up until the Iranian Revolution. So why do you think that happened, and what was the switch key for that to actually occur eventually?
So, I mean, there are scholars of Islam who believe that Shiism, from the moment it was born in the 7th century, is actually a movement of descent. In other words, the Shiites obviously did not dominate the Islamic history. The caliphs were all Sunni. After the Rashidun caliph, the rightly guided caliphs, the Umayyads, the Abbasids, they were all Sunni. They dominated the Shias. In fact, the Shiites claim that all of their imams were killed by and large by caliphs in Baghdad, and therefore but the Shias always maintained that the authority that was in power in Baghdad was illegitimate, that the genuine authority belonged to the family of the Prophet through his son-in-law and daughter Ali, all the way till in their opinion the 12th Imam went into hiding, into occlusion. And therefore, it is the hidden Imam, and before that, the living Imams that were really the legitimate rulers of the Islamic community. Now, they were never able to dethrone the Sunni Caliphate, so they remained a minority, and until the Safavids took over Iran. Now, the Safavids, for reason of their own, decided to do what the Fatimids didn't do in Egypt. The Fatimids did not see it necessary to convert Egypt by force into Ismailism or Ismaili version of Shiism. But the Safavids, because they were at war with the Ottomans, they decided to embrace Shiism as a way of distinguishing Iran from the Ottoman Empire on the one side and the Mughal Empire on the other side. So Shiism became the state religion of Iran, not because the Shiite clerics, Shiite ayatollahs, Shiite saints won Iran, but because the monarchy imposed the religion on Iran. It's almost like how Henry VIII made England Anglican from top down, or how in medieval period a Catholic prince or a Protestant prince would force his population to change their religion. Now, as a result, then Shiites did not object to the kings for a very long time because the kings had made Iran Shia. They were protecting the country. This picture begins to change gradually by the late 19th century and 20th century. First of all, you begin to have Shia clerics who are sitting in Iraq, not in Iran, issue fatwas against the Iranian monarchs and Iranian shahs because they were too weak, or they were doing things to help the British and the French and the Russians, etc. and the Shiites were on, clerics basically issued fatwas against the kings. The Shiites were very, very important in the constitutional revolution in Iran in 1906. It would not have happened without the support of the Ayatollahs issuing fatwas to establish rule of law against monarchy. And then even on the Arab side, the first and major political uprising against the British occupation of Iraq was done by Shia clerics in Najaf and in Karbala. And when they rose in rebellion and they organized the Shia tribesmen against the British, they were savagely put down by the British. And in fact, it's at that point that a number of senior Shia clerics leave Iraq to take refuge in Iran in the 1920s. And Qom, the city of Qom, becomes the city of Qom largely because of this exodus from Najaf. And you have episodes where the Shia clerics took an anti-imperialist, pro-people position. What's different with 1979 is two things. One is that actually they succeeded. I mean, in Najaf in 1920, they didn't succeed to push the British out. Or in the fatwas in the 19th century, they didn't manage to change the government in Iran. But in 1979, they succeeded. So the most important revolution of the 20th century in the Middle East, the one that overthrew a secular Kemalist pro-American government, was not carried out by communists. It was not carried out by Baathists. It was carried out by Shia clerics. So that in itself makes it very important. And you're right, it makes it a singularly important event. The second issue is that Khomeini, unlike the Shia clerics of the past, had a very distinct ideology. This is true of the Muslim Brotherhood too. Muslim Brotherhood, or the ideological side of Sunni Islam that arose from the 1920s and 30s with Hassan al-Banna, Maududi, and then later Sayyid Qutb, is not just simply being religious. It's not just being good Sunni. They have a very ideological view of the world, which you can compare to ideologies of the left and the right in 20th century Europe. A very clear argument for revolution, government, Islamic State, Islamic revolution, etc. And Khomeini belonged to that generation of Islamic thinkers. So Khomeini was not just saying, observe the Sharia or the government ought to be good. He had a very clear sense that there has to be an Islamic government. And this is what Islamic government is. It's the same way as Hassan al-Banna or Sayyid Qutb had a clear sense of there is an Islamic state. It's not just that Egyptians should be religious, that the government should be based on Sharia and not any Sharia, this particular interpretation or reading of the Sharia, right? So in that sense, Khomeini was also different from the past. So you put these two things together, a 20th century major revolution that topples an important pro-Western, secular, powerful state in the Middle East, which is also highly ideological in the way that we know Muslim Brotherhood, or let's say Marxism, Leninism was in Europe. And Khomeini, in a way, was both the Marx and Lenin of the Shia revolution. And that explains a lot, if you would, the character of the Islamic Republic to this day, because it's not about just piety or going to the mosque or doing the right thing. It's a much larger ideology of state and behavior in international affairs and anti-imperialism, etc., that Khomeini put together.
So historically, the old world of the Arab and the Middle East and Asia in general did see some monarchies or city-states that were led by Shiite leaders, like aside from the Fatimiyyin. When you talk about in Syria, for example, Banu Hamadaniyun was like a state that was led by a Jafari Shia dynasty, and same like Bani Asad in Iraq and others. But do you think that bringing the religious identity forward came as a reaction to the national state, the modern national state, and the implications about what after World War I and the fall of the Ottoman Empire, for example? Or do you think this is something that has been going along longer than that? And do you feel that the tension that is created now as a sectarian tension between Shia and Sunnis was something that was historically happening in this intensity, in this frequency, or is it something that is also reflexive of a more of a political tension and drop of power?
I think, it has been there from the beginning. I mean, you go to the very beginning, the Shiites did not accept the rule of the Sunnis. You can go back to Muawiyah, to the Bani Umayyads. You could go back to the Abbasids. They didn't accept the legitimacy of the caliphates in Damascus and Baghdad. And they even didn't accept that the first three caliphs, Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, should have been caliphs. So the Shiites actually became a sect of Islam in defiance with what we usually know as the history of Islam. So that's the beginning. The Shiites believe that their practice of Islam and their version of Islamic law, the Jafari law, is the true practice of Islam. The Sunnis believe that their practice of Islam and the four schools of law that they have are the true practice. And you could say that the more religious you become, the more you see the other side as not religious. So you could basically say that in an era from the 1970s onwards, where Islamism became much more important in Muslim societies as a whole, from Indonesia to Senegal, that when Sunnis are thinking more about what is the right religion, and they're reading Al-Banna and Sayyid Qutb and Maududi, etc., that this is true Islam, this is wrong Islam, society has to build on Sharia, etc., that automatically makes them intolerant of the other side. And same with the Shias. Because if I told you that you are to be a good Muslim and to be a good society, you have to follow the Sharia, the first question is, which Sharia? Yeah, and then you would say, well, this is exactly the Sharia. This is how you stand at prayer. This is what you do. This is the right law, etc. Now, even among the Sunnis, there are disagreements between Hanafis and Shafis and Hanafis, but let alone the Shias, which are seen to be outside. So this is always there, right? This has always been there. And it spills over into the secular environment. In other words, the Shia in Lebanon, go back 50 years, long before Hezbollah, to the 1950s and 60s, would feel that that by virtue of their identity, they're at the bottom of the pile, right? They're all Lebanese, but it's kind of the way Jews used to feel in Europe. They could be German, or they could be, Swiss, they could be anything, but by virtue of their religion, they were looked down upon. Or in the United States, all the way till 1930s, you would say that if you were a Catholic, you would look down upon by what is known as WASPs, white Anglo-Saxon Protestants, right? So this is not only a matter of religion, it's also a matter of politics. Now, I think the key question that you raised it really goes back to 1500 when the Safavids came to power in Europe. Before that, all of these dynasties that you mentioned in Syria, in Iraq, there were some in India. The king, or the Buyids, like very famous Buyids, which were also Isna-Ashari Shias, when they took over power, like the Fatimids, they didn't see any necessity that the people around them need to be Shia. Maybe they're Shia, maybe they're pious, maybe they just happen to be Shia, but there was no reason why they needed to convert their population, right? Whereas the Ismailis, that's the interesting part. Shah Ismail Safavi, which is the first Safavid king, when he took over power, he was not a good Shia. I mean, he was not a Shia in the sense that he followed what in Arabic is known as the Qullat, a sort of extremist, messianic view of Shiism, where his soldiers thought he was God. They thought he's the Mahdi. He was not a proper Shia. But when he began losing battles to the Ottomans, he decided that the only way to protect Iran from the Ottomans was to convert Iran to Shiism. And in the same time, Sultan Selim also massacred 30,000 Shias who lived in Anatolia. So it's very clear that the both of them saw sectarian identity as important to imperial rivalry. Shah Ismail placed so much Shah Ismail and his descendants put so much emphasis on creating a difference between Iran and Ottoman Turkey by virtue of identity, because Iran did not have any Shias. Iran was Sunni, that they went to Jabal Amal in Lebanon, or Qatif in the what is today Saudi Arabia, to actually import clerics into Iran to teach the people how to be Shia. They didn't have their own clerics. There was no Iranian Shia cleric in 1500. So it's very clear that they embedded sectarianism, and in fact, the particularly anti-Sunni language of of Shia piety, particularly in Iran, was encouraged by the Safavids as a way of creating a sort of a wall with the Sunni world. And Iraq of today, the southern Iraq we talk about, changed hands between the Safavids and the Ottomans multiple times. And even to this day in Iraq, they refer to Shias as Safavids or Persians in a derogatory way, right? So, you could say that sectarianism was weaponized in the 16th century as a consequence of the imperial rivalry between the Ottomans and the Safavids. Now, you fast forward to today, there is still value in doing this, right? In other words, what I was witnessing in Pakistan was that the most effective way for Sunni governments to resist the Iranian revolution was to point out that it's not on the wrong side of social justice, it's not on the wrong side of imperialism, but it's the wrong side of piety and religion. It's the wrong religion. It's political. You may like its political message, but these guys are not true Muslims. The same thing was being said about Houthis until very recently, right? That they are Shia, they are Iranian backed, that they are not the right religion, put it that way, in the eyes of good Muslims. And so this weaponization of sectarianism in modern time period has historical precedence. It's not true to say that the Shia Sunni issue didn't exist until Iraq. It might not have been a bloodbath here or there, but it very much was there. It very much was part of the picture. And then, it existed in many parts of the Muslim world in form of everyday prejudices against where there were Shia majorities against Sunni minorities, where there were Sunni majorities against Shia minorities. It's true of India, it's true of the Arabian Peninsula, it's true of Iraq, it's true of Lebanon, it's true of Iran. And so, we have to sort of take that since 1979, circumstances have arisen to again intensify this rivalry and make it politically very relevant. But it was not born recently. In other words, many Iraqis would tell me that, there was no sectarian problem here in Iraq when Saddam was here. We all lived here. It's true. But then they gradually will tell you that, when I wanted a bank loan during the Saddam period, because I was a Shia, I wouldn't get it, that it would go to Sunnis. Or that the minute the Iranian Revolution happened, the first thing that Saddam did was not only execute the Shia leaders in Iraq, the Sadr family, but also expelled and executed all Shias within the Ba'ath party. He didn't believe that Ba'athist Shias were not Shias. And so this suggests that this sort of sense of difference runs far, far deeper. And it's not something that is created recently, but at a time when Iran, since 1979, is playing such a major role in the region, is involved in Arab politics, in Syria, in Iraq, in Lebanon, in the Gaza war, etc., that and the person who's doing this has a turban on his head, and is a religious leader of the Shia world, and the name of the country is Islamic Republic of Iran. It perforce raises the issue about Shias as Shias, not just as Iranians, right? And the reason why Iraqi Shias or Pakistani Shias or Lebanese Shias have these relationships with Iran is not because they're the same kinship. It's because they're the same religion. And why they stick together? Because they have a common sense that they exist in a larger Sunni world that is not necessarily hospitable to them or equal to them or just to them. So yeah, I would repeat that it's a historically old idea that periodically through history, and particularly in our time period, is flaring up in a major way.
So you pointed out to a relationship or a line between the writings of Ali Shariati and his concept of Red Shiaism and the evolution of Khomeini, who also your book reminded me and pointed out that he was never a marji'iyya or a marja in the sense of a religious authority. He was almost always looked at as a political leader. And in general, the Islamic Republic of Iran, the leaders and the general government is not as practicing compared to what the taste of the Jafari Shiism in Iraq are so much focused on the practices of Shiism. And I would also probably draw a similar line between, for example, Muhammad Iqbal and Ziaul Haq. But in what Shariati was trying to write was a more of an inclusive Shia rhetoric that will actually be able to mobilize people who believe in a certain identity. When was the moment that it flipped to becoming a more of an exclusive club, and a club that is actually assigned at birth, where you're born to a Shia family, you're automatically clustered as such, instead of you subscribing to say, I like what Iqbal's saying, I like what Shariati is saying, and I'm kind of subscribing to that and including myself as part of it. And how did that play a role to what we see in Iran, with against the minorities, of course, what happened in Iraq for so many years, as you said, in Pakistan, and is that part of a response to the nation, like the modern national model, or what?
So very good points. I mean, we didn't see the full evolution of Shariati's ideology, but you see, Shariati's significance was to create a bridge between the Marxist-Leninist left in Iran, which was a very, very big force, and the Shia clerics. You would say in an ideal world, these two are opposed to each other. In Iraq, the Shia clerics never supported leftism, Arab socialism, communism. But in Iran, there were two oppositions to the Shah and to the monarchy. One was from the religious sector led by Khomeini and younger radical clerics. The other one was from Marxist-Leninists. And Shariati basically became a bridge between the two. Now, interestingly, is Shariati, in my opinion, was first a Marxist. In other words, the structure of his thinking was Marxist-Leninist, except he understood that if the Marxism-Leninism does not translate well into Persian of everyday Iranian, right? Yes, university professors, intellectuals understand, but if you're going to mobilize the masses, you have to speak their language, and their language is Shiism. So he basically began to read Marxism into Shiism. So he many ideas, including red Shiism versus green Shiism, what he called Safavid Shiism versus Alid Shiism, arguing that Safavids were status quo, whereas Alawid Shiism were genuine revolutionaries, or that many ideas about the fact that Shiism is essentially the ideology of the poor. It's about social justice. It's about revolution. It's about, and even, his interpretation of Karbala and the martyrdom of the Shia Saint Hussein was not that this is a historical event, one time in the world. It's a spiritual event. He basically saw Imam Hussein as Che Guevara, and cast it in a way that what Karbala can be done every day. I mean, he would repeat something that was a more of a spiritual interpretation attributed to the sixth Imam, that every place is Karbala, every day is Ashura, which means that we're in a perpetual revolutionary cycle. Now, this proved to be extremely popular, but it was very different from Sistani's kind of Shiism, but it was not very different from Khomeini's kind of Shiism. Khomeini also was a revolutionary. He also thought of people like Sistani and the old school clerics as too passive, too concerned with spirituality, too concerned with people going to heaven, not sufficiently aggressive in politics. And he wanted to revolutionize Shiism. And at some point after the Shah left, the Shariati trend and the Khomeini trend would combat each other. But a lot of the younger generation clerics, who now actually are all old men, I mean, generations like Ali Khamenei, who actually had a great deal of respect for both Khomeini and Shariati, would in their own thinking mix these two up. So at some point, Khamenei's anti-imperialism is standing up to Israel, standing up to America, war until the end of the world on the side of quote-unquote justice is very much Shariati. Shariati did not have a doctrine of democracy. Yes, he was inclusive in the sense of all Muslims being in, but which is also something Khamenei is trying to do with this axis of resistance, which is not about Shias, it's about Palestinians and Sunnis and everybody standing up to America and Israel. This is very much Shariati in that sense. Now, what happens to Iranian revolution happens to all revolutions, which is at the beginning, they're idealistic revolutionaries, but when they become, they lead governments, etc., and get older, they become like every other state. It's kind of like looking at the Soviet Union. By the time you get from Lenin to Brezhnev, Soviet Union looks nothing like the idealistic, pure state that was originally created. So, and yes, along the way, the Iranian Revolution also brought a lot of religious voices that were not necessarily part of the revolution, who basically became gradually very influential on it. But at its core, the Iranian Revolution was the product of both Shariati and Khomeini. And that's part of why this had much more appeal than just the core constituency of the clerics. I mean, you have to remember, the Iranian Revolution was not a revolution of the poor, regardless of what people say. It was an urban revolution of the middle class and the lower middle class. The lower middle class was closer to Khomeini. The middle class was closer to the leftists. And Shariati was a bridge that helped bring these two together. And ultimately, Khomeini succeeded because the differences between the middle class and the lower middle class never came out until after the Shah left. And then, they were defeated by Khomeini's, constituency of the poor.
Okay. So in light of what you have said, you've also mentioned in the book that the Iran push to acquiring the nuclear weapon is more of trying to show that there's now a Shiite bomb compared to a Sunni bomb of Pakistan. And that's probably more of their focus, in your opinion, rather than what is typically advertised as, we have to kind of a balance against Israel and the West. So how can they, while they're trying to be like a pan-Islamist, pan-national movement, still kind of also differentiate based on the sectarian dimension in something as serious as the future of this country, the most important weapon that someone can actually build, to be a symbol of a sectarian intuition?
They don't say it, but in reality, when you look at it, that's what it is, right? In other words, this would be the Shia country in the Middle East that will have the bomb. Now, it self-consciously doesn't say this is a Shia bomb. It says it's for Iran, it's for the Islamic world, etc. Just like when Pakistan got the bomb, he never called it a Sunni bomb. He called it an Islamic bomb. Actually, Zulfiqar Ali Bhutto was a secular ruler, called it an Islamic bomb. So the Iranians don't say that, but in a sectarian environment in the Middle East, where they have been until recently fighting Sunni countries around them. They went to a war with Sunni Iraq, who used chemical weapons against them. They had difficulty with Saudi Arabia, the Gulf countries, Jordan, Egypt, etc. All these Sunni countries, they confronted a sectarian war, the rise of ISIS, etc., all of which the Iranians understand has sectarian undertones, right? That when they have a bomb, the rest of the Sunni world will see it as a Shia bomb, whether the Iranians call it or not. And secondly, look at the events in the Middle East today. They are basically leading, other than Hamas, a group of Shia clients against the United States and Israel and in the region. In other words, Hezbollah, Houthis, the Shia militias in Iraq. And an Iranian bomb at some point would be an umbrella that would protect them. So if you're sitting in a Sunni country, you're worried about the Houthis, or you're worried about the Shia militias in Iraq, or you're worried about Hezbollah, etc. And you as a Sunni see these all as Shias. I mean, every time you read about Houthis, it says Iranian-backed Shia Houthis, or Iranian-backed Hezbollah Shias. If you're opposed to them, you see Iran's bomb and these groups in the region basically part of a Shia power, right? So to the region, Iran's bomb will de facto be a Shia bomb. And in fact, that's partly the reason they don't want it. it's not just that whether the United States going to bomb them or sanction them or Israel may attack them. That's part of it. But it also is that they think it will aggravate their relationships with their neighbors, and that the minute Iran has a bomb, Sunni countries will want to bomb as well. Because the division between Iran and its neighbors is two things: language and religion. Iranians don't speak Arabic, and they're Shia, or at least that's their image. Whereas at least Turkey, at least is Sunni, even though it doesn't speak Arabic. So anything Iran does to the Arab world, it's either a Persian power play or it's a Shia power play. And there's nothing Iran can do about it under this current government, right? So if it has clients, if it supports Hamas, if it attacks Israel, if it builds a bomb, whatever it does is seen as has a sectarian undertone to it. Because it's part of Iran's identity. That's the way Shah Abbas and Shah Ismail made it in the 16th century, that the identity of Iran would be Persian and Shia, and this is what's going to separate them from the region. So in a way, Iran cannot disown Shiism even if it wants. Even if it doesn't speak about Shiism, like it speaks about Palestinian rights or it speaks about anti-Americanism, still the rest of the region looks at them and says that you're speaking as a Shia power.
So, in light of what you have just said, what is your opinion about what happened recently after the major attacks on Hezbollah and the Iranian kind of distancing themselves from their major client, like a major ally, in a very dark time? Why did that happen?
I'm not sure they backed away. I think Israel had a tremendous intelligence military success that wrong-footed them. And I think the response they gave of basically deciding to attack Israel with missiles because of what Israel did in Lebanon told you that basically they were willing to put themselves at risk of a major war with Israel and the United States in order to tell the Lebanese Shia and tell the region that they are still supporting Hezbollah, right? But look at it this way: every news coverage in the region and after and in the United States after the killing of Nasrallah was about Iran's relationship with the Shia in Lebanon. That it was the Shias that were being targeted. Even the rhetoric of some other communities in Lebanon, problematized the Shia. So in a way, it highlighted again the sectarian issue, right? And so, and I think that the Iranians obviously will calculate, what is effective, when do they react to Israel, how they react to it, what kind of a war can they wage, how do they protect what they have in Lebanon, how do they protect the Shia? So it's not a straightforward pathway, but if you see the reaction to the killing of Nasrallah, it's all about, the Shia of Lebanon and their relationship with Iran, right? It's not about the Sunnis of Lebanon. It's not about the Christians of Lebanon. It's about the Shia of Lebanon. So I think the Iran basically is also, whether it was designed or not, but it has chosen policies over the past 40 years that has connected it to the Shia communities in the region in particular ways, that now it cannot back away from them. So during the monarchy, Iran was Shia, but it didn't see itself as being the protector of the Shias of Lebanon and Iraq. Iran has positioned itself that way, not only as creating and supporting military organizations like Hezbollah or the Kataib in Iraq, but actually of being their protector, having some kind of a special relationship, which sometimes the population in Iran does not support fully. Yes, we're brethren, but it's not our business. That's their own country. They speak a different language. They're citizens of a different country. That basically is a pillar on which Iran's regional policy is built. And so whether Iran wants it or not, it cannot dissociate itself from Lebanon.
Okay. You also mentioned the role of Iran in building Hezbollah, opposing Amal, which is a Shia movement inside Lebanon, and similar thing could have been talked about in the whole situation where you actually kind of not necessarily build but empower a certain group, even if it's gonna go after the Shia themselves. When Hezbollah and Amal had the kind of their fair share of like conflicts among each other, despite both being Shia and both being on the same side of like the struggle against Israel and other stuff. So that was one thing I wanted to point out. So I wanted to ask you now, as we have seen how the Islamic fundamentalist movement have evolved over these years, and we actually ended up seeing Al Qaeda and ISIS and others, and see them going back and being a menace to the Sunni population, what we have seen in Syria, for example. Do you foresee something similar where there's an ultra religious, ultra radical group of Shias and becoming a headache to the newly formed, as you said, the new Iraq, as you pointed out, as the new Arab Shia country, or to Iran as we go forward?
Yes, I do, partly because the destruction in Lebanon, etc., is not being followed by creating something positive that will fill the vacuum. Just like Hezbollah was born from the 1982 Israeli invasion of Lebanon and the occupation of South Lebanon, that similarly, the war can only prevent the rise of a more radical group if it produces something better than there was before. If it just leaves rubble and vacuum, it's going to be filled by bad forces. But it's also important to note that Islamism, Islamic fundamentalism, both Shia and Sunni, were not just purely religious movements. They're not like Sufism, or they're not like, just having a good cleric that is going to help you go to heaven. These are political movements. They are not Islam. They're a kind of application of Islam to politics, which means that they're always about power and turf, like local or regional. So when they arise, they try to assert control, right? They are not humanitarian movements. They're not da'wah movements in the sense of just, they're not movements of spirituality. They are political movements. And part of their initial popularity is the political military message. So Hezbollah became Hezbollah, not just because it defeated Amal, but because it was much better than Amal in fighting the Israelis. I mean, the Shia in Lebanon accepted Hezbollah at the beginning, not because Nasrallah or Musawi before him were, spiritual leaders who were guiding people to be more spiritual, because they were defeating Israel on the ground, because they were providing better garbage collection, right? In a way, so long as you have political battles going on, you're going to have these kinds of movements. And Iran's role in Lebanon, Iran's role in Iraq, yes, there are religious Iranians who just want to be able to go visit the shrines, etc. But the Revolutionary Guards, the Quds Force, is not a humanitarian institution. It's not a dawah institution. It's a military force. It has a military agenda, which is fighting with Israel, fighting with America, dominating here, dominating there. And so its allies are not social, organizational, religious movements. They become military movements. Now, their worth would be about how good they are and what they can do, right? If Hezbollah was totally penetrated by Israeli intelligence and then was decapitated, so unless you build something better there to fill the vacuum, from that rubble there will be something else, which potentially could be worse than Hezbollah, or not. I don't know, but I just don't see that this will disappear just because you destroyed a lot of villages, towns, etc. And that's actually the worst outcome. So you end up perpetuating, if you would, what we saw in Iraq to further. So if today we complain about Iraq, a lot of the Shia sectarian groups formed during the sectarian war of 2006, right? And then this new breed, the Hashd al-Shabi, the PMF, was born of fight against ISIS, right? So because the Iraqi state never filled in the gap is filled by these Shia militias. The Shia militias claim to be defending Shia community, Shia rights, etc., against Americans and the Sunnis. They're not promising to take people to heaven. That's the job of Ayatollah Sistani.
Okay. because it's one thing that kind of stopped me to think about in your conclusion, where you in 2006 talking to the U.S. Administration to actually empower the newly formed Arab Iraqi Shia entity to stabilize the country as a first-line protection against the Sunni Islamic fundamentalism. Do you still think that would have actually worked, or do you think that actually would have only made the iterations of Qaeda, ISIS, and etc., and the response to them only just more faster in a sense?
It might have. You see, you have the view then was that the United States was engaged in a war on terror, which was obsessed with Sunni radicalism and Al Qaeda, right? And ultimately they were looking for ways in the Middle East that they could create, if you would, limits to the appeal of Osama bin Laden. That limit ultimately was the Shia in the region. Now they may have their own grievances, but the Shias did not follow bin Laden, did not read bin Laden. They're not interested in Salafi ideology. They're not interested in Sunni extremism. So it seemed to me that if the Americans had played their cards right at that point with Iran and Iraq, that they could have at least limited the amount of carnage and damage that they were doing in the Middle East trying to fight against Al Qaeda. But that moment passed, and then gradually the United States got into bigger fights with Iran and bigger fights with the Shia in Iraq, and it was forced to leave Iraq at one point, and even again we're talking about leaving Iraq, and also I think along the way the Shia Islamic Republic of Iran and Hezbollah and the forces in Iraq came to the conclusion that there was no deal to be made with the U.S. or a deal that they could rely on, and getting too close to the U.S. meant that they would lose their image of being at the forefront of the fight against the U.S. and Israel. So they backed away as well. I mean, there was a lot of cooperation between Iran and the United States and Iraq at the beginning. Every Iraqi prime minister was basically secretly agreed upon between Iran and Iraq. It's just that the two sides could not take that to the next level. And a better example of that is that when ISIS took Mosul and Revolutionary Guards went to Iraq and put together the PMF, they were fighting against ISIS in coordination with the US. I mean, there are battles in Iraq where the American Air Force was dropping bombs on ISIS, and on the ground was Qasem Soleimani and Hashd al-Shabi fighting. Again, except that neither the Iranians wanted to admit that this has happened, nor the Americans wanted to admit that this has happened. But they both had a common enemy, which was ISIS. But because they distrusted each other, they could not make that. The minute that fight ended, they separated out and started fighting each other. So 2 years later, the United States would actually kill Soleimani in an attack.
Yes, and actually we can see that happened also in Afghanistan, with this high coordination with intelligence between the US and Iran fighting Taliban and Al-Qaeda. Now, the last thing I wanted you to tell me, if you were writing this book in 2024 and trying to give recommendations or conclusions to the United States administration, what would they be in light of all what have happened over these 18 years, from the Iraqi scene to Hezbollah in Israel and what the region looks like now? What would you have
Well,
recommendation?
the United States, by the time of the Biden administration, had arrived at the conclusion that it needed to ally itself with Sunni governments against Iran. In fact, if you look at the statements of the U.S. government, they very clearly use the word Sunni. There are tons of articles in Washington: Sunni Arab states normalizing with Israel, Sunni Arab states and Israel standing up to Iran, right? So it clearly showed you that they view Iran as a Shia Iran and its Shia allies as a bigger problem, and so ally themselves with the Sunnis. But what I would say is, first of all, again, as we're speaking, it has not worked, because the Gaza war made that whole possibility go away, that somehow you could organize the Sunnis to support Israel and the United States against Iran. But the reality is that, playing the sectarian card in the Middle East will be bloody. In other words, yes, you can win short term and say you get your enemies fighting each other and you don't have to worry about it. But in the long term, sectarian fighting could make the Middle East much more dysfunctional. And the more dysfunctional it becomes, the more dangerous it will become for the West and the more worrisome it will become. So sectarian fighting in Iraq, sectarian fighting in Bahrain, sectarian fighting in Yemen, sectarian fighting in Lebanon, which may very well happen after the killing of Nasrallah. The more of these fights happen, you may get a short run, sort of my enemy's enemy, are fighting each other, etc. But in the longer term, it will damage the region even more. And just like out of Amal came Hezbollah, and out of Hezbollah can come something worse. Or at the beginning in Iraq, we had the Mahdi army, and now the Hashd al-Shabi, and within the Hashd al-Shabi, we're having even more dangerous groups come along. And similarly on the Sunni side, that you ended up with ISIS, which was far worse than the Iraqi resistance. This kind of sectarian fighting would create a bloodbath in the Middle East that is highly destabilizing to the region. It will damage its economy, create a large number of refugees, and set back the region decades. So I don't think that's a policy that makes sense. In fact, the irony of it is that there's a point last year that the very Sunni Arab governments that the United States kept referring to, Sunni Arabs, decided that the best policy of stability in the region was for them to normalize relations with Iran. Like, if they really want to invest in their economies, bring peace to the Gulf, peace to the region, and do trade, they don't want to get into sectarian fighting. And so they've toned down their language against Iran perhaps against them. They at least are not speaking in sectarian language. And what they're asking of Iran is, don't encourage the Houthis in Yemen against us, or don't encourage the Shia in Yemen, etc. But the philosophy now is that even at the state level, that it's better for the region not to go down the sectarian path.
Your remarks had actually kind of brought another thought to my head, and I want to hear your thoughts. What would be the solution for the Middle East, and what would be something that you think would help this? I mean, as you said, trying to bring both sides of the Persian Gulf together is something that would actually reflect very positively on the area, much more than any U.S. led Saudi or Gulf Israel normalization. I think the normalization between Iran and the rest of the Middle East will have been much more effective. What do you agree with that? And do you think there's another thing that is missing for the equation for a hopefully better, prosperous region in the intermediate and long term?
Well, this region needs peace and stability. It also, in some countries, it needs better government, but that's internal to those countries. But at the regional level, it needs peace and security. The largest issue today is not the Shia Sunni right now. It's actually the future of the Palestinians. Except the future of the Palestinians is also, again, inflaming the sectarian issue because of the nature of Iran, Hezbollah, Houthis, Kataib, etc. But ultimately, whether it's the sectarian level, whether it's the Palestinian issue, this region needs peace and stability. I think this destruction of large parts of Gaza, destruction of large parts of Lebanon will not bring peace and stability, right? And similarly, encouraging Shias and Sunnis to fight one another, whether it's in Iraq, in Yemen, in Lebanon, etc., will not bring peace and stability, right? You have some 200 million people living in this region. They're not going to disappear, right? They're only going to get to somewhere better if there is economic development, political prosperity, openness, and peace and security, right, on their daily lives. And so you have to solve the core issue here, which is the Palestinian issue. I mean, when we go back, how did Iran become powerful in Lebanon? It was after the Israeli invasion to destroy the PLO that Iranians found the opportunity and the means to involve themselves in Lebanon, right? And so, we have to solve the core issues around which the sectarian issue can become energized and fight, right? So I think the Middle East is in a bad place right now. There is danger of going back to sectarian conflict. There's dangers of the Arab-Israeli, the Iran-Israel conflict that also spinning out of control. But ultimately, this is a region that has had too much conflict for too long, and it's being devastated by it.
Dr. Wali Nasser, thank you so much for your time, for your insight, and for giving us the opportunity to chat about your books. Ladies and gentlemen, the Shia Revival book is now available on our platform, translated as صحوة الشيعة. You can listen to it on Nashir.app. Thank you, Dr. Nasser.
Thank you very much.